So I am so happy to be here, and I'm just thrilled, and I can't wait to talk with you. I've honored this person from afar for a long time, and it's felt to me like we should be together in some way, and so I'm glad that this occasion has emerged for that to happen. I always pick up somewhere random to read, so I think that probably today read something about birds. How many of you have read the book already? Oh, small number. Great, this is perfect. Okay, so the book is a book about, well, actually a random person on the Substack explained it so well that I feel like I need to actually relay it to you. This person said, let's see, um, loading. This person said, it's a beautiful, earnest, queer love song about surviving, about choosing to survive, about loving long and truly, which means loving brokenly, about how healing is collective, is deeply intertwined with collective liberation. It's not something that happens in isolation. It's about music and cooking and sex and parenting and making beautiful art, and how all those things, all those places and people and moments and ideas are what has kept Carvell alive over and over again. And I was like, wow, that person really got it. I could never explain it that way. So I'm going to be using that. But so the book is structured in 3 sections. The theory is that it's about recovery from trauma, and the theory is that at the beginning, trauma happens, and then we have to sit with it, and then we have to turn with it, and then we have to somehow recover from it, and that a lot of recovery has to do with reuniting with whatever was taken from us in the early traumatic moments. So in section 3 is called Stories About Reunion, and those stories are meditations about different moments in my life where I experienced maybe some reconnection with something that was maybe taken from me when I was young. So this chapter is about the older people in my life who were younger when I was a kid and who are now reaching the end of their lives. 2 of my aunts and my mother and my uncle, so that's 4 people, and each of them gets a little section in this book as I understand them now, as well as some memories. And the whole thing takes place while my then partner and I were walking around a lake and looking at nature. As my love and I walked, we noticed a rustling in the bush. As my love and I walked, we noticed a rustling in the bush, and I remembered that it was early spring, a time that is supposed to be related to resurrection. We don't do resurrection quite the same way back in California because nothing ever dies there, and time is not a circle. There it is more like a dot, a singular point at which all things, past and future, perpetually coexist. But I grew up on the East Coast, which is where I am now. Here things go away and return. Trees, fruits, birds, plants, flowers. Even the light disappears, dying right before your eyes, only to emerge once again like a perpetual magic trick that nature has been performing for a million seasons. The rustling was a bird, an American robin, its red breast thumping, nosing its way through the low branches dotted with scattered buds. It was our second time around the lake on our walk. I stopped to look at the bird and also to catch my breath. My walking partner seemed less interested in the bird than I was, which is understandable. The American robin is not remarkable, it is basic. Despite being one of the most common birds in North America, it still contains the power to fascinate me. Gray-black plumage with a bold rust-colored breast, intense white ringed eyes, and pale trims on its feathers that curve like a song whispered to the wind. How can an entire life exist in a body so small? How can something so common be so exquisite? That right there is nature's wildest poetic trick. My Aunt Leora is one of 3 remaining was one of the 3 remaining who were still living in this area. She was the one who kicked us out in the snow that night so many Februaries ago. Despite this, in my childhood, I remember her as unspeakably gorgeous and elegant. She drove a gold 1972 Pontiac Le Mans, which seemed to me to be the most regal vehicle a person could have. More than a car, a chariot of the golden diva in my mind, with white seats as wide as an ocean. It rode like it was being carried on the current. In my memory, she was all shimmering earrings and floral polyester, a body that looked the way a hug feels, a laugh that echoed from the wood-paneled rec room walls and held us in its arms, the same way the albums in the stereo held our hips and made them dance. Bobby Humphrey, Teddy Pendergrass, Sister Sledge, Stephanie Mills, Patti LaBelle, Donna Summer, Barry White. My aunt got down. We all got down. Now it is many years later. I am in my late 40s, so old that I must stop and look at birds as an excuse to catch my breath. Her life is largely confined to a bed and to an easy chair that sits next to it. She still smokes. Her voice is still a song, just in a different key. Each sentence is still a pronouncement. She still laughs like she is shaking fruit from a tree. When I was a teenager, I thought you could pull things over on her because she drank a lot. Now it seems as though she is incapable of missing anything. Maybe she always was. Talking with her is like playing a video game where the boss attacks you slowly enough that you think you should be able to dodge the blows, but you somehow never can. I interviewed her once for a book project that has not materialized in the way I thought it would, and the thing that struck me most was her power as a human being. Whether that power was for something you liked or something you didn't matter. She seemed to be coming from a source much deeper in the earth than most of us, or maybe much closer to the sun. It was as if the ancestors liked her voice and chose to use her in order to be heard. It was not the words that mattered, of course. It was the music that her voice seemed to carry. Spring means renewal, which means change, which means that things are being born, which means that things are dying. The robin is supposed to be the first sign of spring because it is among the first to return from its vast annual tour of the earth. These little tiny birds, usually weighing no more than 3 ounces, fly up to 250 miles every day during migration. Though their home is in the United States, vagrants from the migration pattern have twice been recorded as far away as England. This means that at least twice, a bird weighing 3 ounces has flown alone across the entire Atlantic Ocean, just so that it might sing its song for different years. Lately, I've been imagining this journey, the days and nights of it, the vast darkness of an ocean, an endless sky, the hushed certainty, a force that knows only to go until it cannot go anymore. What is life other than the irrepressible drive to do this? It has become something of a quiet family joke that my Aunt Leora is, in some sense, indestructible. I suspect this has to do with how hard she seems to live at times, cigarettes and alcohol, not to mention how hard it felt at times to live with her, because hard living is not something you can do alone without affecting the people around you. She has been on and off oxygen and has limited mobility for years, but she continues unbowed. The ancestors are not done speaking through her, I guess. The last time I saw her, she told me that her advice to her granddaughter was not to pay attention to men's words, because men lie. We both laughed, but I'm not sure we were laughing for the same reasons. With that said, maybe you should disregard everything I've just said to you. Everything I know about anyone, I only know from a distance. A funny thing about American robins is that they get drunk. They will flock together, gorge themselves on fermented berries from the percanthia bush, one of the few berries available during winter, and if they eat enough of them, then they will start to stumble around and fall over while walking. What better way to celebrate the miracle of having both a life and a death, a disappearance and a return? To be able to fly forever, and then to drink of God's fruit so hungrily, so voraciously, that you are not even able to walk. Thanks.
So your outfit is fetching.
Oh, thank you.
You know, it's very author on the run, from town to town.
Author doesn't want to pack a lot of clothes for multiple weeks away from home, so
Yeah.
you have to find an outfit you can basically wear every day.
Yeah, and it looks great and it's touching. So, this book is so unraveling to read in a way that, like I texted you, I was like, wow, thank you for writing a book for poet kids who grew up poor and had all of the feelings in the world, you know, and I think you just do that so well. I wanted to ask you about how you care for your younger selves and your grown selves. And this like very almost shamanic memoir. So just wondering like how do you navigate telling your story, telling the stories of so many people you love? And the younger selves and little selves that I just felt around me as I was even reading. So I'm sure they're with you as you're writing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that question. I do feel like there was a shamanic thing involved, which I don't want to make too much of, but was there. Because I felt like in order for me to do what I needed to do, I had to call on things outside of me and bigger than me. In other words, the task of like unraveling all this stuff, I'm not equipped in this life, in this body to do that at all. That's bigger than I have capacity for. So I had to call in reinforcements like my ancestors and just anybody basically who looked out for me. I was just like, wherever you are in whatever realm, if you could just pull up right quick and help me do this, because it's going to get weird. And I think that the way that I chose to do that materially was there's a chapter in here in which I write about photographs. I write about a photograph of my grandparents, and in another chapter I write about a photograph of myself. But I can think of photographs as altar objects, and I use the photograph as a way into maybe calling on the person or people that are connected. And then I specifically wrote about some of those people as a way of inviting them into the room. So I think that even though it doesn't come till later in the book, that's actually some of the first stuff I wrote, was the investigations of my multiple great-grandmother. I never forget remember how many greats there are, and being like, when I was going through my family history, I found this one ancestor, this one relative that I was like, for some reason, this is the one I think who wants me to talk about her. This is Sophie, and because I can see her now. Like, of all the other people, I'm reading these names, it's like, oh, here's Benedict this, and like Louis that, and I'm just like, they're not connecting. But then I see this one name, and like an image comes to me of this person, and I was like, I think she's the one that wants me to write about her. So I wrote about her, and once I did that because I wanted her to be invited in. So I think that I felt much safer with that. Because this is scary, and I'm also kind of foolish about how big things are. That's part of what makes me, I know I have a weird double consciousness around this, which is that I've always known that I am unclear on the true weight of things, which is kind of puts me in danger, but also makes it easy for me to do big things. And now that I'm at like 50 years old, I now recognize that in order for my life to work, I have to hold both those things. So when people would be like, this seems like a big deal, I'd be like, does it though? I don't know, I'm just gonna write a book. Like, it's not gonna be, so there's like a little denial there. And so I think that also protected me a little bit, because I was just like, whatever, I'm just telling the story. Everyone's got a story. My story I'm just one of 9 billion people on the planet. What's the big deal? And then in moments when it threatened to become overwhelming, that's when I was like, actually, this is fine. I don't care what these people think. I know that Sophie loves me and supports me. So as long as I have that, this is gonna be fine.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you said that, because I brought my tarot cards in case you wanted to pull a tarot card.
That's what's up.
While doing this thing, because we talked about pulling tarot cards, and like I said, like this felt very witchy. It felt very held in multiple dimensions and multiple timelines. And just you describing like the ability, I think as writers, to almost be like the fool in the tarot, where you're willing to, take risks and be vulnerable in ways that have to do with naivete. You kind of got to be like, oh yeah, no big deal, as I slide off this cliff to potential anything. And I felt that like vibrance in your writing. Like it felt like you were constantly at the cliff going into all of these
That's
steps
so
with
great
yourself.
to hear. Because that's what I. The problem that I have is that it's not possible for me to write anything that doesn't. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's just very uncomfortable to write anything that isn't like that. I'm sort of locked into that because it's like once you know that that's what writing can be, I have a hard time not doing that. Especially if I'm writing about myself. Like I ghostwrite other people's books. Okay, like if I'm writing like some basketball player's story, I'm catching this person's voice. This person may not want to be at the edge 24/7. They just want to be like, it was exciting getting drafted, so that I'm like, okay, it was exciting. But for me, this is like my offering of myself to the world, and my offering particularly to my children, who will probably read it later after I die. And I feel like it was necessary for me to like go to the edge and be off the cliff almost every sentence.
Yeah, okay, I have one question, but I think I might go to, well, no, let me just stick to this question. So what about this time in your life, in your soul existence, made this book possible to even come to be written?
That's such a, I'm sorry, I don't want to, that's such a much better way of framing the question, because people are always like, why did you write a memoir now? And I was like, I needed the money, because if you ask that question, that's the answer.
Yeah.
But if you ask what made it, it was time to get paid. But if you ask that question, then that actually makes me reflect on. The book is about change, right? It's about coming from a place and trying to get somewhere else. And like the place where I came from, I mean the spiritual place, is a place where there's a lot of stuff that I have to get away from. There's my own trauma, there's our collective trauma, there's the trauma of patriarchy that is foisted upon me as a child, where people are like, this is how you should behave, and if you don't, you're, not only are you a traitor to patriarchy, which whatever, but also I'll probably beat you up. And then it's like, okay, well, I don't want that, so I guess I have to sort of get in there. And there's also then all of the personal harm that we cause by trying to heal ourselves at other people's expense. And what I mean by that is that I have this theory that I lay out in the book that everything that we do is some attempt to reconnect with what was taken from us, but sometimes those attempts are incredibly misguided. And I think a lot about, this is something that it says, like I worked with the kids who were in lockup facilities and what have you for a long time, and one thing that became really evident to me through them that I realized was true for me is that everyone saw these kids as a threat somehow, but they always struck me as threatened people. People who had lost something really valuable really early and were scrambling to find some way to get some piece of it back. It's a survival instinct. And so for a long part of my life, I too was driven by unexamined survival instincts to get back pieces of myself that were taken from me by other people who themselves were trying to get something back. And so what changed for me is a lot of things, but the one thing that was like the through line is like, I want to be in loving relations with the people I'm in with and in the world. And so I have to deal with whatever stands in the way of my ability to love. That just sort of became clear to me one day when I was in my 20s. That sentence just came to me one day. Actually, I was reading a biography of Muhammad Ali, if I'm being honest. And I was like, oh, I get it. This person, like, on some level, was emptied out and was a vessel for, like, some other thing to work through them. I think that's what I want. I want to clear whatever stands in the way of my ability to love. And so this is now a lifelong thing that you keep working on. And I think what allowed me to be able to do this part of it, which is very scary because you're, exposed, is that I finally had enough clearance in my life, enough community, enough safety, enough of a sense of who I am, that if I wrote this honestly, and everybody was like, this book is trash, you suck, don't ever write again,
I would be extremely bummed, but I'd be like, well, at least I was honest. At least I went out honestly and said what was true for me, and so I'm good now. I can still go work at Trader Joe's, love on my kids, grow my plants. Like I actually have that now, and I don't think 10 years ago I had that. I think 10 years ago I needed the praise to make me live, which meant that the lack of praise could make me die. So I think that's what's changed.
That's a word. Yeah, just like so much of writing is, the most powerful parts of it is how vulnerable and honest and real, both for yourself and for people who read the work. Like whenever you're kind of able to be like, wow, like that's a part of me that I didn't even know I needed to hold.
Yes.
That's the stuff that people are really able to ground in and find things within themselves. And also, it's so rare for people to be that almost like soulfully naked, you know, in the ways that I think this work does.
Well, the problem is that I find it hard to do good writing and not do that. And that it's almost like, I was joking with someone else, I was like, my ego to protect myself and look good is dwarfed only by my ego to be a good writer. And so it turns out that in order to be a good writer, you can't make yourself look good. You have to actually, especially if you're writing about yourself, you have to tell the truth, and that means exposing some things that maybe you would not, the ego's fearful child, sensitive rejection part of you doesn't want people to know about, but the artist in you is like, God damn it, this is what we got to do. And I remember when I went in college, I went to school for experimental theater at NYU, and one of the first things I really learned making my own work is that almost every time I put something in a piece and then was like, I don't know, that's a bit much, maybe let's not go there. Every time I left it in the piece, that would be the one thing that everyone was like, wow, that moment. Yeah, so it's like, I guess that's how it works, man.
That's how it works.
Unfortunate.
Well, because it is shamanic.
Yeah.
It is like spirit work. It's not just like aesthetic. It's not just storytelling. It's like, oh, we're really having to go there.
That's right.
And you have access to it. There's something naturally that has access to it. So one thing I was thinking about is that your work is so poetic and beautiful, and I think there's a way that really sort of galvanizes and captures story. That you're saying, like the heavy, hard, scary, sad things, because yes, you're a grown man telling it, but you're telling it about this young child that I feel very protective of, even though that young child's a grown-ass man, right? So I was wondering about, like, how does poetry, and I came up with this term, poetical thinking and feelings. I do think there's a way that poeticalness, that's not quite a word, but whatever, the way it feels, the way it thinks through things, right? There's ways that it can expose and share, but there's also ways that, it can evade and it can hide.
It can evade and hide.
Yeah, so like how do you
Real
contend with like the beauty that sort of gets to the center and the beauty that seeks to hide the truth?
Right, man, so I really do, like last night I kind of went off on one about, I don't know, where it was like, I forget where in the tour, but I kind of went off on one about the use of beauty to uphold sort of like empire and whitewash reality. Because I love beauty, I get really mad about that. I don't like that. And I feel like, I also recognize that as artists, we get co-opted into that a lot. Especially when they start throwing money at you and a little like contract and a little partnership with Dove soap or whatever type little thing they throw at you, then you're just like, well, yeah, I'm gonna do a little partnership. And then I need this bread. And then you just get conscripted into this thing, and it's hard to, and whatever, like, I'm not knocking anybody's hustle because people gotta do what they gotta do. And I'm aware that for myself, when I think about my integrity, I have to be real about the limitations of beauty for beauty's sake, while at the same time, really enamored of the power of beauty when coupled with honesty and when coupled with courage. The courage to say things that are hard to say and confront things that are hard to confront. I think beauty actually can be a little bit of, it can make the medicine go down. Not even for the reader, because I'm not trying to like take it easy on people. And I mean, for me, it can get me in there. And, there's a corollary to this idea, which is that, my writing is often focused on details. And someone asked me earlier in this tour why, and I hadn't thought about it, but I realized when I was looking back through the book that the details become really important in times of trauma, because when really painful things were happening to me as a kid, one thing I did was I learned to focus on details, like the way the light was coming through the window and the way that the sun was and the little like peeling paint, because those details were neutral. They were so, and therefore they were kind, because they didn't mean me any harm. I could just observe them and they just let themselves be observed. They were like godly in that sense. I'm present and you can see me. And it was like, okay, finally someone I can trust, which is the way the light is coming through the window. That I can trust. So to me, that's the kind of beauty that is necessary to move things, is the kind of beauty that has to do with listening and connection and presence. But beauty is not a story necessarily, although I do actually make one story about beauty here with relationship to my mother. But beauty is not a story. Beauty is a container. The story has to, for me as a writer, the story has to still be told. We've still got to tell some real story about a thing. And that's, if you don't do that, and you can make a lot of money just doing beauty as a container and selling it, but I wish I could low-key, because I could pay for my kids' college with more ease, but it's hard for me to do that, so it is what it is.
Okay, so I was just exploring, because, so much about being an artist is like, there's often the romanticization of like, oh, the starving artist, and that it's like this choice, right? Like, you want to be an artist, so you're choosing this artistic asceticism to struggle for the art and whatnot. And I think what's interesting in your story is that we're witnessing actual starvation and just longing and yearning for comfort and care and nourishment, and also the way that artistry in another way had a flip sort of experience for you, where it actually gave you access, to nourishment. It gave you access to being fed. It gave you access to being seen. So anyways, I just was kind of curious about the ways that, and also to be an artist, even if you do come from struggle, you're still going to be struggling, but the struggle feels different and more benevolent maybe. So I just was curious on your thoughts of that, of like holding being an artist, and also the roots of what made you, in a lot of ways, I think, an impeccable one.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just gassing.
Okay.
It's true.
No, you bring up a really interesting point, which is that I do feel like I think one of the things that makes my life somewhat unique is that I came from difficult circumstances and then got access to better circumstances through no doing of my own. In fact, I did a podcast in 2017 called Closer Than They Appear with Al Jazeera, where I went back to my hometown, which is a small town called McKeesport, Pennsylvania, that used to exist and really doesn't anymore because it was a steel town. It's gone, and now the whole thing's been taken over by just weeds and the occasional person wandering down the middle of the street. It's a full ghost town. But my best childhood friend lived there, and we parted ways when we were like best buds, 24/7, peanut butter and jelly. And then we parted ways when I was like in 5th grade. And he stayed in the neighborhood, and my aunt and uncle moved me to like a different neighborhood. And then he ended up becoming like the big drug dealer in the area. He got shot in the stomach. He almost died. He went to prison. He had a whole different life. And so I did a podcast episode where I reunited with him, and we talked about like what are the different things that happened to us. And the thing that I realized when I was doing that is that I did not choose to get airlifted out of there. And so I can't take credit for it. And I don't quite know, I guess I'm just using a lot of words to talk about survivor's guilt. I don't quite know how to hold that, because it feels like I did something wrong, but I know I didn't. And he was like, no, of course you didn't do something wrong. You have to get out of there. And then the person I was dating at the time was an immigrant, and was like, oh, well, that's your family immigrated. Like you're a migrant. And I was like, that's not true. I'm an American. Like in my head, I was like, I'm an American. I didn't like hearing that for some reason, which exposed this whole thing this whole secret chauvinist chamber I had in my head that I didn't even know about. But they were right. I was like, my family migrated to get to safety from a place where there was no safety. So I always feel some kind of a weird way about that. And the only thing I can think of to do is to show up as honestly as possible in the art. I was an artist before I got moved to whatever situation I got moved to. Being in that situation allowed me to have access to making art. It allowed me to be around people who were like, hey, how about you make some art? And then to be like, I appreciate the art you made, go make some more, right? That's what it allowed me to do. But I was an artist before that. So if the ancestors or whomever put me here and were like, dude, go, you're gonna make art. And then some forces of capitalism and whatever said, no, you're gonna move up the hill where the teachers or the classrooms are funded, and we're gonna put you in that situation. Then the only thing I can think of to do is to show up as honestly in the art that I make as possible, and to jump off that cliff, because I have to give.
But I think it's also interesting, and in some ways I kind of related in the book in the ways that your specialness and kind of awareness that your ability to be a good actor, to be poetic in a lot of ways, because there's this one scene, I have my book in my bag, I might grab it in a second, and you're saying you write about beauty because, you know, you were coming out of the shower and your mom was being arrested for a bad check. And also this was a time in your life where you're also going, that there's a way that you could talk to the police and talk about being a theater kid and do all of the things that made them look at you as more multidimensional as they were seeing you in that moment.
Yeah.
And that to me also feels to live into this way of survivor's guilt, that like the fact that you're able to essentially perform, you know, in this context, you know.
Yeah, well, I write about being in LA during the LA riots, because I moved to LA when I was 14, and then the LA riots happened when I was a senior in high school. And we lived in this stucco apartment in Studio City, which is this kind of, you know, and after I got home from school, I went outside in the back to smoke a cigarette, which my mother didn't know I was smoking yet. She was a big smoker. She died of lung cancer. So I had my secret cigarette, and then someone in one of the buildings called the police, and because it was the day of the riots, the police showed up, like, ready to blast. Like, they hopped out of the cars, guns drawn, like, immediately on me. They were screaming at me. I had just come from, like, Midsummer Night's Dream rehearsal. Like, I'm like, what the fuck is this? And so so it was this thing, and I write about this chapter in the book about the out-of-body experience and the ways that you start to calculate all of the different ways you can survive, and how do you keep your mother safe, because if she opens that door and someone gets spooked, you know that's a problem, so you don't want anything to go wrong, and all you want to do is make everything go smooth. And you're also, like, very quickly becoming aware of your own mortality and doing the rush job of making peace with the possibility that you might die. You're like, okay, I might die. If that happens, that'll be fine. You're doing all this work, and you also want to keep these guys calm because they have guns pointed at you. And so they were like yelling stuff and all this stuff, and then at some point it came out that I went to this arts high school. They were like, oh, really? What kind of, it was like theater. They were like, oh, theater, that's cool. Do you like an actor? Do you have an agent? Yeah, I do have an agent. Oh, that's cool, man. And it was like, you know, it was like that, and I'm just like, yeah, totally, like, making small talk with these guys, because that's the only way I can survive, is by having this, like, access to language, to their language. Yeah.
So there's so many, okay, so the chapter of the bread, you're like,
I almost read that chapter because I thought you might like that one.
Yeah, I love that chapter, I love it all. But yeah, so in the bread, you're making bread, and you're listening to Solange's When I Come Home album. It's a total vibe, and then you're reading Audre Lorde and Pat Parker's letters to each other. And I just kind of felt the dinner party vibe of you and all these people, and also the sort of queer black feminism that they reflected that's in you in a lot of ways. And also bring Frank Ocean to this dinner party, because there's this other chapter where you really speak to the ways that he's able to hold the dimension of queerness and hip hop that, you know, is the dialect that you embody and whatnot. So I just was curious about you at a table with all of these magical queer black people, and I'm including Solange in the queer black realm. You know what I'm saying? So just wanting you to kind of just speak on the presence and the holding of those particular people in that particular chapter, and how it holds and speaks and reflects you
Yeah.
Miss kind of.
No, I think in a lot of ways, I really love you calling that out, and I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. Because I think, I write in that chapter that there's like Pat Parker, there's Audre Lorde, there's a tangent about Donna Summer, there's all these particularly black women from the 80s and 90s that I'm rediscovering now that were kind of present when I was younger, but who are these people actually besides just like they have this hit, they wrote this book. So Edward Standicat, like it's like Patrice Rushen, who I didn't even really realize like what she really did as a musician. Like I didn't realize that for a long time, like shamefully into my adulthood. I just was like, she's another pop star, you know, and I was like, hold up, this is like a full jazz like musician. And I think that, so what those people do for me is they give me permission to be who I am. And that's permission needed because so much of the actual world around me has many different ways of saying, you're not supposed to be the way you are. That's actually not the right way for you to be. You gotta be some other way. And it's from all directions. And I know that that's wrong, but also I'm a person and I don't wanna make everyone mad at me. So I'm quite susceptible to people, on some spiritual level, to people telling me not to do a certain thing. If everyone tells me not to do it, I'm like, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be that way.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of them.
Yeah, and so when I connect, part of what I like about connecting with these artists is I can feel them going, no, you're right, the way you are is good. Like, go do that. And I need that in order for me to show up at the page. I also think a lot of this book is about, a lot of the theory of recovery is that we can recover by reclaiming things that have been taken from us. And one of the ways to reclaim relationships is by revisiting the way we view people. We were taught to view them a certain way, and now we have the freedom to break of that teaching and view them another way. And I write about that with my mother, with the people that raised me, that maybe it was even appropriate for me to think of them this way when I was 8, like whatever, but now I don't have to do that. I don't have to be bound to that history. And I think that one of the major ways that subtle systemic oppression works is like the oppressor frames how we think of people. And so inevitably I'm going to think of people the way that the oppressor has taught me to think of them. And in that I get something taken from me. And so part of reconnecting with, like I said about Donna Summer, not knowing what Donna Summer was as an artist, only knowing her as kind of like a sex symbol, you know what I mean? She's like you get the nasty thing and you're not supposed to look at it because the parents can manage you. Like, I didn't know who she really was as an artist. And to reclaim that is a way of reclaiming something that was taken from me, which is an understanding of not only her potential, but my potential, your potential, all of our potential. So it's about getting that back.
Okay, cool. Okay, so y'all, how much time do we have for questions? Because I also want to manage, and also if there's questions in the audience, which I imagine there is.
We have like 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. So, okay, I'm gonna go into some fun, sexy Prince-inspired questions.
Let's do it.
So I think so much, you're in the land of Prince, as you know, for the first time.
Yes.
And I think so much of Prince honored and exuded the ways that like Black masculinity wants to be pretty,
Yes.
is actually can be very comfortable and feminine,
Yes.
and sensuality. And there's this, one chapter where you talk about being young and putting on your auntie's pantyhose,
Yeah.
and feeling a connection and then being shamed for it. And
Yeah.
then, chapters later, we get to go with you to a play party and see you really sort of embody, all of the ways that your gender expansiveness lives in your embodiment. So just wanting you to talk about that, how that sort of continues to unfold for you even at this stage.
Well, first about the Prince thing, I have to say that two of my favorite, I was a music writer first, that's where I broke into writing. I wrote for Pitchfork and then MTV, and two of my favorite things that I ever wrote, and I encourage people to read them because I'm proud of them. Other stuff I'm like, don't do that, that was a paycheck. But I'm proud of them, which is that I wrote a short eulogy for Prince in MTV when Prince died. And I love that piece so much because I talked about what I learned of beauty and the contradictions of black male beauty and masculinity as evidenced by Prince, particularly during the era of Under the Cherry Moon / Parade, which Under the Cherry Moon is a god-awful movie and contains some of the most fascinating studies of black masculinity that I remember ever seeing, and they were really impactful for me as a child, despite the terrible acting. And Parade is an incredible album to me. It's like actually my favorite Prince album. So there's that, and then the other thing is that I got asked to write the official Pitchfork review of Purple Rain, which was so great to do, because when you write a review, you're always afraid that you're going to get it wrong. Like I always think about the guy who said Beyonce is no Ashanti, because their solo albums drop at the same time, and I always think about that. These are the perils of being a reviewer. You know, you can just hang yourself, and so it's so much easier to write to review an album that everyone already agrees is the great. I was like, it's 10 out of 10. What can I say? But I also write in that piece. I did a lot of research about the coming about of that album. And one of the things that was really interesting to me, this is a tangent, but I'm just going to go off on it, was that, when Prince was touring with 1999, he was on the same tour schedule as Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. And so he would always be at the hotel in the lobby, and Bob Seger and his jean jacket crew would come walking by, and Prince would be looking at them. And eventually he started being like, why are these guys so popular? And he started having these conversations with his band, what are they doing that is bringing people out like this? And that's sort of where the genesis of Purple Rain came from, which is arena rock? Yeah, I can do that. Let's go. And so I love the idea that Prince basically was one of the greatest albums of all time was inspired because Bob Seger kept walking by with his mullet and his jean jacket. And Prince was so petty, he was like, look, I don't want him to be the biggest. It's really funny. But what was the question?
Yeah, because I was going to bring you back to it. Just the way that, black masculinity, femininity, because Prince also, wore draws and trench coats and, full beat of a face.
Yes.
And I think even amongst the most, quote-unquote, masculine of men, there's something very disarming about Prince's existence and how it speaks to that.
Yes.
Person.
Well, my friend talks about seeing him in the 70s, early 70s, play in Detroit and get on stage with a trench coat and G-string, throwing beer bottles at him. But he was like, no, this is what I'm doing. He was just so good that eventually the crowd calmed down. So this is an answer to the question, because my understanding of gender isn't finished. It is not about where I land, it's about where I don't have to stay. It's about where I get to escape from. That's where I'm at now. So I no longer believe I have to stay anywhere, gender-wise, that has been prescribed to me, but that isn't interesting to me. I get to go and explore anywhere I'd like to go for myself, gender-wise. I don't know I don't have a final answer. I've never been a big labels person, so because I just truly don't know. But I do know that I experience great joy with the possibility of being freed from the constraints that seem so arbitrary and just I don't fit them. I just don't like them and I don't fit them, and I don't want to have to deal with them, and I feel like I'd rather not. And I think Prince is an interesting example because there's a particular thing about this is a whole tangent. Actually, I'm not going to get into this because this will take forever. But there's a particular thing that has to do with his aesthetic was feminine, but his behavior was masculine. And the masculine behavior was really, I think really important to balancing both sides of that for him. And I think that's true for a lot of black men. I think about black femme aesthetics in all, even Snoop Dogg, constantly when he first came out, always with the presses, and there were rappers that had finger waves, Rodney O and Joe Cooley. We're going back to women's hairstyles, but you could rock them as long as you were masculine enough.
Wearing Dickies, as long as you were wearing Dickies.
You had to be super masculine in order to rock them, And I think of Sucker Free, just having just the idea that you could embody this softness and this femininity as long as you backed it up with the threat of violence. So growing up, I was like, well, I like the softness and femininity. Could I have that without could I make a little adjustment? Could I have that without the violence? Let's actually, because I actually don't like men that much. This was my experience growing up. I found men mostly difficult to deal with and annoying. And I was rarely interested in men growing up. I was always more interested in women in every way. Like romantically, just friendship-wise, I wanted to be like women. I like the way they talk. I like the stuff they listen to. I like the way they just everything they did. I just thought was the best way to do things. That's what I just thought they did everything the best way. Like I just couldn't think of a thing that men did better. And so I think that those ideas, those aesthetics were opened up for me, but I also had to do something different than what Prince and the Princes and the early Snoop Dogs of the world did.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my last thing. It's a rapid fire playlist.
Okay.
Where I'm gonna ask you a question and then you have to give me a song.
Woo! This is okay. All right.
I mean, you can
Let's
consent
do it.
to say no.
No, I can't do that now because I've been challenged.
Okay.
I'm still
So
working.
I'm just gonna say a scenario and you're gonna tell me the song that you would pick for that.
Okay.
Okay, a song for when you're emo.
A song for when I'm emo. The song is called, I think it's called Blue and Green. It's off the Miles Davis album. That's off the Miles Davis album, Kind of Close.
A song for when you feel sexy.
So many. What's the first one that comes on? Actually, I think Bins from When I Get Home is an incredibly sexy song.
A song for you to marvel at hip hop's alchemy.
A song for you to marvel at hip hop's alchemy.
Just like, you know.
Yeah. There are so many. This is kind of embarrassing because it's low-key basic, but I'm in a West Coast phase again.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school in LA, I was sort of like the one kid who liked East Coast rap, and everyone was like, what is this? And I was like, boom bap, boom bap. But now, so I had a little bit of going against the flow, but now coming back, I really am appreciating West Coast in a new way. And I'm so sorry this is an interesting answer, but It Was a Good Day has actually been on repeat for me a lot. Because musically that song is incredible, but I also love the lyricism of it. The idea that all I need to do is talk about what it felt like to be alive on one day. And the flow with that beat, with that Isley Brothers sample is so perfect. And it alchemizes a feeling of having a good day on the West Coast, under the sun, a day that begins in the morning and ends long after sunset, and you're high the whole time. It alchemizes that into music, and it's beautiful to me. Yeah.
When you want to remember what it is to be raised in a black family. A song.
We Are Family by Sister Sledge. That was my mother and sisters used to really get it up on that song, and I used to watch them from the sidelines, and I was so excited for how excited they were.
Okay, 3 more. A song for when you want to be with your 8-year-old self, when you want to be with your 16-year-old self, and then one last third one.
A song for when I want to be with my 8-year-old self. Maybe Stop the Love You Say May Be Your Own by the Jackson 5. Like all people who were my age at that era, it was Michael Jackson or nothing. For my 16-year-old self, that was around the time I discovered both Soul to Soul, which was my first foray out of hip hop into some other thing. So that early British club stuff, African diaspora British club, I probably would listen to Soul to Soul to really go back to those days of being 16 in LA on a skateboard.
And the last one is for when you're feeling ratchet.
The first one that came to mind is Rack City. because that song is just so ratchet. And yeah, that one. I mean, it's that's the first one that came to mind. But there's no shortage.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? There's no shortage.
Thank you so much.
This was so great. Thank you.
Any questions in the audience? Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we could do one or two.
Okay, cool, y'all. And you can come up to the microphone. I can bring the microphone to you. Yeah. This is kind of awkward. Yeah, I think it's awkward. Yeah.
I could try to project too.
Yeah, if you got it like that.
You got it. I'll try.
Yeah.
I love your book. I've read it last couple weeks. Everybody should buy it.
Period.
Thank you.
I
agree with that.
There's a lot that was like stopping me in my tracks reading it, but one of the things that kind of buzzed was the first time I read the word "you," like you were speaking directly out, and then I started tracking it, like who is it, and I kept asking like, who's the you? Is there a consistent you for him, or is it changing? And then tonight you said this is for your kids. And I was wondering, sometimes it seemed like that was your kids, and I was wondering if you were tracking the you, if you were like
I don't know. I don't know if I was tracking the you in a very specific way. I just know that I liked what it did, how it sparkled through the surface of the book every time it was used. It just kind of like I just liked seeing that. And the first time I used it, it was from when I had a much different premise of the book, but this line stayed and I liked it. And it was something like, if I recall correctly, I was talking about I was talking about a night of tremendous trauma and all the memories of it. And then I say like, but I have to stop now. You know how memories are on a thing like this, the way they keep coming. And I don't know who that you is, but it's a way of, I like it because I think it's a way of saying, I know you're out there, I just don't know who you are, but I don't have to, because we're connected. Yeah, that's what I think.
Any other questions?
It's okay, because no one read the book yet, so it's hard to
Yeah.
right?
I mean, they could just ask you about your business.
Should I read the book? Yes, you should read the book.
Y'all, thank you so much for being here, being cute, and buying books, and you're gonna be around to sign books.
Yeah, we're gonna sign out.
Yeah, up at the front.
Up at the
We've got
front,
books
yeah,
and
I'm
you
gonna
can
sign
hang
front.
out for as long as you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.